All right. Hello, everyone. Jim Clark here at the Synchronicity Sanctuary in Central Virginia to welcome you to another live stream sharing a contemplative focus with you. And the contemplative focus that we want to look at today is no mind, no problem. Is that so? So, what this is pointing to is the condition that we find our situation that we find ourselves in as human beings is a part of the creation of consciousness itself. It's an intentional creation. Mind is a dimension of thoughts and beliefs. Thoughts and beliefs, whether they're illusory or truthful, are forms of consciousness. Form in relation to formlessness is a limitation in consciousness. By virtue of the principle of contraction, also called negation, essence contracts itself into consciousness. Consciousness contracts itself further into energy, and energy contracts itself further into form, and then into matter. Okay, and we recognize this through science today, but we don't recognize it spiritually so much as a collective whole. And yet, quantum physics and modern physics have explored the microsphere and the macrosphere, and we come to realize that there is so much energy contained in what we perceive as empty space that we know there's something very big going on that we just don't quite comprehend yet. And yet yogis throughout the ages have discovered this in their way too. So we're limited. All forms are limited in consciousness. That's the simple truth of it, because when you condense yourself and contract yourself as consciousness into a form, you lose the awareness of yourself for who you truly are and what you truly are. And so this is the human dilemma. This is the reason why so many people throughout human history have asked the questions, why am I here? Who am I really? And what am I doing here? And how do I get out? And so we realize that all becoming is a limitation in being. Our being is hidden from us for the most part when we first come into this world, because we are by default negative polarity dominant, which means contraction, which means limitation, which means we're confined to our five senses and our mind, which is why we say no mind, no problem, because thinking is a big problem generator. It's a story generator. It's an illusion generator. And in that sense, no mind, no problem is true. If we can quiet our mind, which is questionable, then we do not suffer the problems and contradictions that the mind presents to us moment to moment to moment. But that's really not the whole story. The whole story is we are consciousness contracted into form, and the only way we can break through the limitations that we have in form is to bring balance to form. And that's what conscious lifestyles are all about. Your holistic lifestyle. You're born by default with a dominant negative polarity in all your dimensions, your mind, your emotions, your body, everything. And so you're limited in what you can see and what you can experience as far as who you are, and what you are. But as you meditate, which is a balancing technique, that's all it is. It's all it ever was. But in that, it is so powerful, a tool for people to use to answer those primary questions about life. As you start to meditate, you build balance because you're taking your focus away from the external world, the negative polarity, the becoming polarity, where action and motion and taking part as a human being all occur, and you're focusing inward. You're going inside yourself. And when you go inside yourself, you're entering into a different world. And even though you don't see anything in the beginning, you may not experience much in the beginning of meditation. By switching your focus, you're giving your power to the positive polarity. Whereas before you were giving it all to the negative polarity by default. And so as you practice meditation and holistic lifestyle to support that meditation by bringing as much balance and health and well-being as you can to yourself, you generate more power to the positive polarity. You become more and more balanced inside, so that eventually the positive polarity balances out the negative polarity. And at that balance point, this is where real breakthroughs in revelation happen, because then you can start to see beyond the limitations that you were born with in form, which is something unique to the human experience, which is why we're having the human experience, is to ask the questions and come to resolve those questions for ourselves, to become illumined, which means to where there's dark, there's now light. And that comes from the balance that you create from meditating. And it's so simple, and yet it's so easy to overlook and dismiss. Especially today when the external world, the becoming world, is so busy and so available. We can distract ourselves endlessly on the internet. And yet, if we take that same amount of time and start going in, instead of staying outward with our focus, we start to generate more and more power from being, and becoming begins to become balanced out. And after that balanced point, when you first have some breakthroughs and whatnot to tell you that there's more to you than meets the eye, and you keep developing more and more positive polarity dominance in yourself, then essence, the beginning of the contractive process, eventually becomes a palpable experience. You as essence are now in your awareness, and as that grows and grows, you realize that this is it. You are the essence of all creation, taking a form, a human form, in order to discover who you truly are, instead after being totally identified with who you are not. And this is the quandary that people have throughout the ages since time began, and this is being involved and totally identified with your body, with who you are in whatever time and whatever context you're born in. And then you get involved in your stories generated from the mind, and then you get in conflicts about your stories and about your true nature, which is love, which is unconditional love. And yet the stories and the experiences that are generated when you're limited to the form that you're in and identify with a form is anything but love. It's competition. It's all kinds of conflict, because it's not your true nature, and yet you don't know that yet. I think a young baby being born is in more touch with their true nature because they haven't begun that process of identification yet. So it's what attracts people to them, and why they love children so much, because that innocence, that being is still pretty much alive in them, and people feel that around a newborn baby, and they have that energy and they have that attraction, which is part of the reason that helps them to survive, because people, your mother and your father especially, experience that with you, and whether they recognize it for what it is or not, they do get that experience, and somehow that just draws them into you as a part of them. And so the difference in the polarities in this case has a direct effect on the people in that environment. And also they do here too, because if you're in a positive polarity dominant environment, you too will experience an energy that's very noticeable to you and very different from you. Because if you're still not balanced and you're still mostly suffering from limitation and you're contracted and battling with your identification of who you are and what life is and so forth and so on, and then you enter into a location, let's say, where there's still a dynamic, an energetic dynamic that has been planted there by someone or some people that were illumined from years of living a holistic lifestyle and meditation, and you get in these spaces and you feel something that's unique and mysterious and yet uplifting as well. So these things are very well known throughout the earth and the world, and there's histories about different places that have energy vortexes, which are very powerful, and people go there just to experience that energy because they still think they are human beings and are still working within limitation to answer the questions of who am I and what's life all about. So, no mind, no problem. Is that so? To some degree it is so. But ultimately, balance is the key to all these contemplations that bring up the on the one hand, they bring up the quandary that we are in as human beings, as consciousness contracted down to physical form and having self-reflective possibilities. We are just always wondering, what's it all about? What's going on? But then we get so immersed in becoming and what we're doing in our profession, in our jobs, and in our relationships, and on and on and on, that the real questions of life often go unanswered because we're negative polarity dominant in our experience, and we're trying to work within that, even though that's what's blocking the answer to our questions. Ironic but true. And so as we meditate and generate more balance within ourselves, we generate the possibility and the eventuality of breakthrough experiences that tell us there's so much more to us than we could have ever imagined. And our true nature of unconditional love begins to emerge in our experience, and we realize that everyone is going through this experience, and that everyone is here because that's what they're here for. That's what life on earth really is all about. It's just consciousness in its creation game, moving from who it is not to the realization of who it is, to the truth of who it itself. It's pretending to be what it's not in order to discover what it really is. And this is the creation game simplified, and yet that's really what's going on. There's nothing wrong about it. There's nothing inherently wrong, although as a human being, when you're in form, there can be an immense amount of suffering involved. And we know this for sure because we see it every day in the world. And we experience that at various levels in ourselves. So the desire to resolve this suffering, to bring it to an end, is one of the reasons why being born and living at times like these on earth are highly regarded, because the impetus to ask the questions, who am I really, what life is all about, and then to move into some action to resolve those questions is much greater than in other periods of time where life on earth is much more less contracted, let's say, more aware in general. So life is relatively blissful, and there's not much of an impetus to take it further because you're having such a good time when you're a human. So that's what I wanted to share with you today is no mind, no problem. Is that so? Let's find out. So thank you for watching. I'll be back again next Monday with another contemplative focus to share with you. And until then, enjoy no mind.